Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Now today, questions and condemnation over a video released of the journalist detained in Belarus. But will international sanctions help free him? And COVID hotspot confusion. We'll ask the Work and Pensions Secretary, Therese Coffey, about new restrictions that local leaders say have come out of the blue. Plus, 1 year since George Floyd was murdered, we'll speak to the man in this picture that made headlines during the Black Lives Matter protests and ask him if anything has changed. And
something has changed within me. Something is not the same.
Singing in the rain, how choirs are harmonising their call to be allowed to practice inside. It's Tuesday, the 25th of May. Confession criticism. The father of a journalist detained in Belarus says his son was forced to appear in this video to admit organising mass protests. Gobsmacked. Local leaders claim new guidance restricting movement and mixing in COVID hotspots slipped in under the radar. Calling for justice, campaigners mark 1 year since George Floyd's murder. In a special programme, we asked the brother of the murdered London teenager Stephen Lawrence what needs to change.
Has anything changed? Has people's mindsets changed? I think the one thing that sticks to my mind is people still feel like in certain corners their voices are not being heard.
Falling further behind because of the pandemic, new figures reveal how lockdowns have led to more of the most disadvantaged pupils skipping school. A very good morning to you. The father of the journalist arrested after a passenger plane was forced to land in Belarus says he believes his son has been forced to record a confession video admitting to organising mass protests. The video shows Roman Protasevich in the police station in Minsk saying he's being treated with respect. US President Biden said forcing the plane to divert was an outrageous incident as the EU announced new sanctions against Belarus, calling it an attack on European sovereignty. Alistair Bunkall reports.
This was the last photo taken of Roman Protasevich just before he boarded the Ryanair flight in Athens. He was arrested, along with his girlfriend, when their flight was forced to land in Belarus. Nothing was heard from him for 24 hours, and then this video was released from his prison in Minsk yesterday evening.
My name is Roman Protasevich. Yesterday, I was detained by Belarusian police at the airport. Now, I'm in Minsk Police Station 1. I can say that I don't have any health problems with my heart or any other organs. I'm being treated with respect and according to the law. Right now, I continue to cooperate with police and confess to organising mass protests in Minsk.
Protasevich's father said he believes that his son was forced to lie on camera.
My son cannot admit to creating the mass disorders because he didn't do any such thing. It's unlikely he went for a deal with the prosecutors. I think it's just that he was forced to record the message. We especially can't understand exactly when the message was recorded and how truthful it is.
International outrage has come thick and fast. First, the UK banned Belarus's flag carrier from landing in Britain and UK airlines from flying over Belarus's airspace. And then late last night, the EU announced the same.
We will not tolerate that they play Russian roulette with the lives of innocent civilians. This evening, in the first part of our meeting, we reacted very quickly, as was necessary given the events.
This is an attack on democracy, this is an attack on freedom of expression, and this is an attack on European sovereignty. And this outrageous behaviour needs a strong answer.
The US is on the same page, but is yet to announce any punishment for Belarus, although President Biden has described the incident as a direct affront to international norms and has hinted at sanctions to follow. Lithuania has told its citizens to leave Belarus for their own safety. Speculation about Russian involvement hasn't been confirmed, but Presidents Putin and Lukashenko are reportedly due to meet later this week. The Belarusian leader has very few allies now. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
Oh, well, let's head to Brussels and our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons. I mean, certainly, Adam, the EU seems to be taking a very strong line, much stronger than the UK has taken.
Well, the European Union is worried about Belarus and it's worried about Lukashenko for a whole panoply of reasons. Number one is that in the minds of many diplomats here, he is a rogue leader. He is simply unaccountable and doing things that have taken the EU by surprise. The idea of aviation piracy, of forcing a passenger jet out of the sky, is completely unpalatable in their minds, and also the suggestion that he isn't just close to Vladimir Putin, but the idea that actually there were KGB agents on this flight at the same time raises the spectre of this country which sits between the EU and Russia. There were sanctions against Alexander Lukashenko. There will be more. We know that they have created this no-fly zone effectively over Belarus. They have sanctioned individuals. They have banned the Belarusian national airline from flying over the EU. But I think they are now considering a package of even tougher sanctions. The question is how to sanction Mr. Lukashenko without damaging the dissidents within Belarus who they want to support.
OK, Adam, thank you. Well, let's talk to the Work and Pensions Secretary, Therese Coffey, who joins us from Westminster. It's good to see you this morning. Look, the EU certainly seems to be pushing a much harder rhetoric on Belarus than the UK is at the moment. Do we need to get in step with that?
Well, I think the Foreign Secretary set out to Parliament yesterday the sanctions that we are putting in place. But it's important to have coordinated effort, which is why we are working with other countries to condemn this completely and utterly unacceptable behaviour, and we'll continue to do so.
But are we prepared to go further?
Well, I know that the sanctions are already in place. The Foreign Secretary will continue to review what further actions may be needed, but we will continue to work with our partners to condemn this activity and to make sure the situation is restored as quickly as possible.
What's our view, the UK's view of Lukashenko? Is he a legitimate leader in our eyes?
Well, what I would say is that we do not accept the behaviour that's been demonstrated by the leader of Belarus. We will continue to condemn that. I'm not going to get into various more diplomatic situations more than what the Foreign Secretary had already set out to Parliament yesterday. OK. Look,
this video of Roman Protasevich that has been released, is there any credence to that and what he says in it?
I don't know the answer to that, Stephen.
So you're not... I mean, his father says it's been coerced, which, I mean, look, wouldn't come as any great surprise, would it?
I don't think it would come as any surprise, but I'm not in a position to tell you exactly what our latest intelligence is on the coercion or not of this. But all I can say is the behaviour of the Belarus regime does not lend itself to think that in any way this statement was offered voluntarily. It's important that we follow through with the sanctions and working with other partners in order to get this situation rectified as quickly as possible. This
whole thing is a huge concern, isn't it? Because as we've seen with the sanctions which were applied last year, I mean, they don't seem to have made any significant difference. And as Adam Parsons was saying, this, even the possibility that KGB agents were on the plane. I mean, this country, which is a key link between effectively Europe and Russia, it raises so many questions. I mean, is this really sort of pretty near the top of the agenda for government at the moment?
Well, as the Defence Secretary set out the other day, the threat from Russia is a constant one, which is why we are continuing to invest in our defence infrastructure in order to kind of tackle that. But what I would suggest is it's the concerted action where we are working together with our partners from Europe and elsewhere in order to step up the action against the Belarusian regime, and we will continue to work together to do that.
Can we have a chat about the COVID situation? Because there's this new guidance we've become aware of, guidance for areas linked to the Indian variant. I mean, they're effectively local restrictions, aren't they?
Well, I think when the Prime Minister talked about the issues of the Indian variant last week for COVID, that he said that we need to be extra cautious in certain areas, including those where we had sent in as Public Health England extra surge testing. And the guidance is entirely just in line with that and was issued last week. We are in regular contact with the councils and communities in that area. So this was just about more formalising on the record the guidance that would go alongside the need to be extra cautious in making sure we get a grip of the situation of this particular variant.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, the guidance was introduced last week. It was introduced on Friday, but there was no official government publicised announcement. The Labour MP for Bolton South East says she's gobsmacked by the advice and wasn't given any notice whatsoever.
Well, as I've said, the Prime Minister had laid out that we need to take extra caution in certain areas and regarding the Indian variant. It's good practice to have formally put that guidance on the record affecting those communities. As I say, we've been working in close contact, so I'm surprised to hear that people think this is sort of come out of the blue. It hasn't. It's about formalising on the record the guidance which we believe people can and should follow in order to make sure that we tackle not to have more spread of the Indian variant.
And look, while a lot of people would support that and taking whatever action is necessary, I mean, the concern here seems to be that this has been introduced under the radar, because it's not just Yasmin Qureshi, it's other local leaders and public health officials in these key areas are saying they just didn't know. So in terms of the importance of clarity in everything we do in relation to COVID, why didn't the government just make it clearer what was going on?
I think the government has made it clear. It published formal guidance. It was focusing on particular communities where we've seen a significant increase in the transmission of this variant. That's why resources have gone in to do surge testing and to encourage more people to get the vaccination. So this is just a part of a coordinated effort, and the guidance is simply a formality, recognising the people wanting to be need to be extra careful in those communities in particular where the issue has been spreading. I'm pleased to see that more people have taken up the vaccines. It's important that people get the jabs. It's important that people take the special precautions that we want to see to reduce the transmission. Otherwise, there could be more problems in that community. So far, we haven't seen the impacts because of the efforts by the community, and all the guidance does is simply formalise what was already effectively happening in practice in the locality.
But, I mean, the problem is we're not going to see any impact from this guidance, are we, for a number of weeks? We know it's a sort of about 2 to 3 week lag before any data comes through, and yet the Prime Minister seems keen to make an announcement on June the 21st pretty quickly. I mean, ultimately, this could still impact June 21st, couldn't it, and that opening up of the whole country?
Well, Stephen, we've always been clear that we wanted to make sure we had all the relevant data. That's why we're holding off publishing some further information, simply because we're still gathering more data to understand the impact of the Indian variant. It's important that we do that, but I expect the Prime Minister will still be in a position to make an announcement in early June, but we need to continue to make sure we collect the relevant data, understand the effects of what's happening with the variant, understand the effects of what's happening with the guidance that we've given to people, and it's important that people continue to follow that, and also the basics as well as getting their vaccination.
I mean, I know there's this huge demand for normality after June the 21st. I don't think there is anybody in the country who doesn't understand that desire from the public and from government and all of this. But we are getting these reports that even people who are fully vaccinated, which is going to be a majority of people in the country by then, are still going to have to self-isolate for 10 days or 2 weeks if they come into contact with someone infected by COVID after June the 21st. Now, that seems a little bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Well, Stephen, I'm conscious there's a headline in one particular newspaper today. I strongly suggest to people that they wait to hear from the Prime Minister, from the Chief Scientist, from the Chief Medical Officers, in order to understand what is happening. We're not in a position to say that yet. It's really important that people continue to respect. We're only in step 3. We're not in step 4 yet. We've always said it's going to be driven by data, not dates. But I think the important thing is that we are starting to see a return to normality. People can go out out, but we still stress that go out into restaurants and pubs and similar, and go into other people's households where the guidance is clear on that. But it's important that we still stick to the basic rules. The sorts of things that we want to get people focused on is getting people back into work, making sure whether it's we've got a particular scheme where we've now got 100,000 people, getting that tailored support to try and take advantage of the vacancies. This is all part of the roadmap to recovery. So getting on with the jabs, getting on with getting people ready to take up the jobs. But we still need to be careful at this stage. COVID has not gone away, and things like the Indian variant and what we've seen is a recognition of that, but also a recognition of the actions that we've been taking collectively and with communities in order to try and get a grip on this and localise any outbreaks and really try and get a grip of it.
In terms of getting people back to work and the job entry targeted support, it's a £238 million scheme. You reckon there's 100,000 people on the road to getting back into another job now? I mean, is that going to be money well spent, or is there is the expectation that this is actually going to start helping perhaps 1 million people or so? I mean, it seems 238 seems an awful lot of money for 100,000 jobs.
Well, I think if we can get the number of people back into work by using that extra tailored support, it's for people who've been out of work already for 3 months. Some of the initial perhaps help they've been getting hasn't quite worked, and we are starting to see people get jobs, and that's important that people continue to realise or take advantage of extra support in order to get that particular job. It's been such a tough time. We've focused a lot on young people and Kickstart, but actually it's people of all ages that we need to help to try and get back into work and to take advantage of the opportunities and job vacancies that really are opening up.
Minister, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Well, as we were saying there is some new guidance for people living in COVID hotspots affected by the India variant. So let's have a look at the latest COVID figures for you. And there have been 2,439 new cases of COVID-19 in the UK, along with 3 more deaths reported. That means the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test is now 127,724. Meanwhile, another 126,357 people have had their first vaccination, 252,139 have had their second, and in total, very nearly 61 million jabs have been administered across the UK. That's still to come for you this morning. What more should the UK do in its response to the detention of Roman Protasevich? We'll talk to the former ambassador to Belarus, Nigel Gould-Davis, at 7:30. Concerns over epilepsy drugs and the risk they may pose to unborn babies. We'll hear from an epilepsy sufferer about her worries about having children. And at 8:20, I'll talk to a GP who set up the Vaxi Taxi, helping people with problems get their jabs. Now, members of George Floyd's family are marching in Minnesota to mark the first anniversary of his death. He died after being held down by the neck by then police officer Derek Chauvin. The march is organised by the group Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence, which is calling for a change in policing laws in the state.
Floyd was my man. He was but one man. And there are so many cases that we need to reopen, not only in this state, in this country, across the world. We all know that.
Well, to mark 1 year since the murder of George Floyd, Sky News asked Stuart Lawrence, whose brother Stephen was murdered in a racist killing in London in 1993, to reflect on the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement in the UK over the last 12 months.
I just wanted to see how far we have come from a year on. Has anything changed? Has people's mindsets changed? I think the one thing that sticks to my mind is people still feel like in certain corners their voices are not being heard. They saw injustices happen over here with the stop and search figures, the death in police custodies, the layers of the institutions that discriminate against you. We've got problems and issues over here as well.
We'll bring you a special report presented by Stuart Lawrence to commemorate the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. That's Stephen and George, the killings that inspired a movement. It's at 9:30 this morning. And at 9:45, we'll talk to Patrick Hutchinson, the man whose picture went viral when he pulled a white protester to safety from the middle of a Black Lives Matter protest. Let's look at some other headlines for you this morning. And the US government has warned against travelling to Japan for the Olympic Games because of the pandemic. A surge of infections in Japan has cast more doubt on whether the Games should go ahead. But Japanese ministers say they believe there's been no change in the US support for the Olympics. Soldiers in Mali have arrested their president and prime minister, raising concerns of a second coup in a year. A military coup in August overthrew the then President Keïta, and many people are now concerned that the army intends to stay in control. The lead singer of the Italian rock band Maneskin, which won Eurovision, has been cleared of taking cocaine during the show. Damiano David returned a negative drug test after shots of him leaning over a table caused a frenzy of online speculation. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is in Israel, where he'll be talking to the leaders in the wake of the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas. Alex Rossi is in Jerusalem for us this morning. Look, an important set of meetings, Alex, no doubt, but does it hold much hope?
Well, Stephen, these are the highest level talks that have gone on since the crisis, the 11 days of fighting, which saw much bloodshed. Antony Blinken arrived in Tel Aviv, about an hour ago. He's going to be meeting the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and then he'll also be having meetings with Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, which is crucial, really, because ties broke down completely during the Trump period as a result of his unalloyed support of the Israelis. Now, there are really two components to these talks. They're described as kind of fairly low-key, but we're hearing this phrase again coming out of the State Department: quiet, intensive diplomacy, trying to get things moving, but slightly kind of below the radar. They'll concentrate really on shoring up the truce. It's been in place for a few days now, but it is pretty shaky still. All of the dynamics, the fundamentals which drove the fighting in the first place, they still exist. For instance, the flashpoint of Jerusalem. So they'll try and negotiate around that to see if they can strengthen it up. The other thing that they will be focusing on is humanitarian aid into Gaza. Trucks are starting to roll it over the border with fuel, medical supplies and food. But remember, Gaza has been under a military blockade from the Egyptian side and also the Israeli side since 2007. It's always teetering on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe, but it's even worse at the moment. So it's key that that aid keeps flowing in. And they'll also, I think, discuss how to kind of reconcile Fatah and Hamas, possibly, which won't be easy, of course. The Palestinians are not only split geographically between Gaza and the West Bank, they're also split politically. In terms of the peace talks, I think they probably won't really do very much on that at all. I suspect Antony Blinken will put out feelers and try and explore the possibility about how you could resurrect that, but that won't be easy. There isn't a huge amount of hope that he'll be able to advance that at all. And then tomorrow, of course, he'll meet other regional leaders, the Jordanians and the Egyptians.
OK, Alex, for now, thank you. Now, as the country emerges from the depths of the pandemic, new figures seen by Sky News suggest there's been a marked increase in the levels of truancy from schools. Disadvantaged children are apparently much less likely to have returned to the classroom after lockdown. One of the worst areas is Chester. There was a 25% increase in persistently absent school children. Our home editor, Jason Farrell, reports.
This room is a safety net. Called The Base, it's for kids at Dunraven School in South London who are at risk of dropping out.
I'm here because I was struggling to go to school and I was out of lessons a lot.
Jack started going absent from school because, like many, he struggled with adjusting from primary to secondary. He preferred lockdown classes.
I like that because I was fine doing the work at home. I'm just sitting on my computer doing it. I think it's when I'm there in real life I start getting stressed out and anxious.
Zarlene says, but for The Base, she may not be here. She's come to speak to the support team because she found coming back to school overwhelming and has had panic attacks.
Being forced to stay at home 24/7, it's kind of flared up my anxiety because you're basically trapped by yourself all the time with no one to really distract you.
The schools noticed that children from disadvantaged backgrounds are least likely to attend regularly since lockdown, and parents give a range of reasons.
The explanations that are given, for example, they're really struggling to get students out of bed and to see the purpose. They've lost a sense of purpose. I think another thing with that is that they have been staying up very, very late. They've got into this pattern of being so much on their phones, or game playing with other people. That's been their form of contact.
Nationally, post-lockdown school attendance levels look OK, but the enthusiasm of some to get back to class has masked the drop-off of others. Much has been anecdotal, but a new study by think tank Social Finance of 17,000 pupils in Cheshire West and Chester has found a 25% increase in persistently absent children in the first term of the academic year, and most of them from poorer backgrounds.
The key concerns that we've found is that the children who are persistently absent are the children we should probably be most worried about. These are the children that are accessing free school meals, that have contact with social care, or have got a special educational need. These children are invisible, and we need to make them visible.
London schools in poorer areas are so concerned that they're forming a new group of heads called Reconnect London to pool ideas on how to tackle the problem.
I think at heart it has to be about the relationships that the young people feel they have with adults, trusted adults in school. And I think if those relationships exist, if the adults in school know how to develop those relationships and engage with those young people, you've got a much better chance of getting them in.
It's always been children from disadvantaged backgrounds who are more likely to skip school. But what this report shows is that that problem has become more pronounced. Lockdown has widened the attendance gap, and it's those kids on the fringes who are falling further away.
The reasons are complex. Saskia desperately wanted to go back to school.
I've lost my identity because I haven't been very social.
She's been absent from October last year to April because her mother was shielding with cancer.
And I'm not very good at communicating my feelings, so my mum couldn't really help me in that sense because I just shut down.
Report authors say the government shouldn't just focus on everyone catching up, but also supporting those at risk of falling out of education altogether. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, she's never absent. Naz, you never played truant from this shift.
No, absolutely not. It's my favourite and only shift.
Yes, well, there you go. What have you got for us today?
I've got some weather. It's going to be another cool and breezy one with some wet weather around. But fear not, slowly but surely, dry and brighter conditions are on the way towards the weekend.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning, and I'm going to start with some good news. Drier, brighter, warmer conditions are on the way, slowly but surely towards this weekend. But there will still be a bit of wet weather around. But until then, we've got cool conditions and quite a bit of wet weather to contend with for today. In fact, this morning there are showery spells of rain across eastern parts of Scotland, northern and eastern parts of England and Wales. There's also heavy rain across the southwest of Ireland. But elsewhere, it's a mainly bright and fine start for this morning. Then going into this afternoon, that showery rain across northern and eastern parts of the UK will tend to break up into showers, some of which will be heavy and thundery in between some bright or sunny spells developing. But overall, it will be quite cloudy across these parts until a little later. As I said, some of those showers could be heavy and thundery, even the risk of hail. And across the southwest of Ireland, we'll continue with the rain there with some heavy downpours at times that will slowly edge towards parts of the southwest, mainly across Cornwall, where it will be a rather wet afternoon. But for the rest of England, Wales, Ireland and Northern Ireland, bar the odd shower or two, it's looking mostly fine and dry, but it is going to be still quite cool for the time of year.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, we'll be looking further at the detention of Roman Protasevich with the UK's former man in Belarus, Nigel Gould-Davis. It's in a couple of minutes.
Breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. शांति से इनको समझाओ वरना ये हम लोग It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Now, the father of the detained journalist and activist Roman Protasevich has said he believes footage of his son confessing to organising anti-government protests was forced out of him. Well, earlier I spoke to the Work and Pensions Secretary Therese Coffey, who told me it wouldn't come as a surprise if the Belarus regime had coerced the confession.
I don't think it would come as any surprise, but I'm not in a position to tell you exactly what our latest intelligence is on the coercion or not of this. But all I can say is the behaviour of the Belarus regime does not lend itself to think that in any way this statement was offered voluntarily. It's important that we follow through with the sanctions and working with other partners in order to get this situation rectified as quickly as possible.
We can talk now to the UK's former ambassador to Belarus, the editor for Strategic Survey and senior fellow for Russia and Eurasia at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Nigel Gould-Davis. Good to see you this morning. Look, what does the last 48 hours tell us about Mr Lukashenko?
Well, the forced downing of the plane tells us that he, having been until now a threat to his own people, has become an international threat as well. It was an absolutely outrageous and unprecedented event. It also shows us that he himself does not feel secure if he has to go to such extraordinary lengths and incur international outrage to detain a single dissident journalist who had been based overseas. So that tells us something important about his regime. I think we can be impressed by the scale and speed so far of the international reaction. The EU has moved very quickly on this. The UK as well, although I hope we will see further actions announced in due course. The United States is fully behind this as well. So it tells us that we're now at a new level of confrontation, unfortunately, in what's a very difficult situation between Belarus and the West.
But in terms of us sort of toughening our stance and presumably potentially more asset freezing, potentially sort of stronger and wider sanctions, is that going to actually make any impact? I mean, as we keep saying, as I've said the last couple of days to people, I mean, what the sanctions and asset freezing we saw last year do not seem to have made any difference, at least to his political posturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple of points. Firstly, sanctions are not a magic bullet or not a switch that you turn on and expect things to happen immediately. Things always take time in international politics. So we shouldn't be too impatient and demand immediate results. This is slow, steady work. The second point is that the sanctions that have been imposed so far have actually been fairly limited for the most part. They've been largely on individuals, as you say, asset freezes and travel bans and so on. I think given the escalation of Belarus's outrageous activities, the point is now to correspondingly escalate the sanctions and move from a situation where we're just imposing restrictions on individuals to a broader approach to putting pressure on the regime. And that means, among other things, going after the financial flows, the various ways in which Belarusian state companies are dependent on access to Western finance and Western markets. These are the money flows that help sustain the regime. So I think it's important now to calibrate the response, make it more severe in light of what's happened. And again, that won't be a magic bullet. It won't have immediate effects, but it will make life steadily more difficult for this regime, psychologically, financially. So I think it's the right thing to do at this point.
But in terms of the international response, though, how much will it be in the minds of international leaders, global leaders, the close relationship between Belarus and Russia?
Belarus and Russia and Putin and Lukashenko personally have long been engaged in a toxic embrace. Neither likes the other, but in a sense, they need each other for the moment. And it's true that one of the reasons that Lukashenko has managed to stay in power following the peaceful outburst of the demand for democratic change in Belarus, which we've seen since last August, has been Russian financial support. I'll just say this at this stage. There is no clear evidence yet that Russia took part in this operation, but it's something that we shouldn't rule out. And as the investigation into this air incident develops and as new information comes to light, I think it'll be important to see whether there is actually a connection there. And the implications would be very serious, of course, for the West's relationship with Russia if that were to be the case. We know that there's been cooperation between the Russian and Belarusian security services in the past. Let's see if that turns out to be the case here as well.
I mean, look, you know more about diplomacy than the rest of us. In terms of how we view Lukashenko, should we be viewing him as president, as the legitimate leader of Belarus?
I think it's right that Western countries have made clear they do not accept the legitimacy of the rigged election last August. It was clearly falsified, outrageously so. So I think it's right not to consider him a democratic leader.
And in terms of the action that we can take and further sanctions, I mean, in all of this, there's got to be the consideration of what impact this could have on the opposition in Belarus. I mean, you've got to bear in mind that the impact on the people of the country rather than just the leadership.
That's absolutely right, and that's a reason I think, for making sure that any sanctions measures are carried out in consultation with those who have been so bravely fighting for their freedom. Broadly speaking, the direction of travel of sanctions thinking and practice in recent years has been away from imposing a kind of brute, blunt measures that hurt the country as a whole, towards more targeted, smart sanctions, which go after individuals responsible for unacceptable actions and against the regime that keeps them in power. So it's right that the sanctions should seek to pressure elites and power structures while minimizing the deleterious effects on ordinary people. So again, talk to the Belarusian opposition and make sure that that's the case in your design of sanctions.
No, it's good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, since George Floyd's murder, many athletes have shown their support for the Black Lives Matter movement, with sports stars taking the knee before matches, joining marches and taking part in social media boycotts. Our sports correspondent Martha Kellner looks now at a year that has seen sports personalities making political statements as never before.
I will say directly, no, I will not go.
Sport and politics are indivisible. Those who take a stand, like Muhammad Ali refusing to fight in Vietnam, have found themselves exiled. But this was the year protest went mainstream. Naomi Osaka, the world's highest paid female athlete, wore the name of a black woman killed by police in Kentucky, and Anthony Joshua marched on the streets of Watford. A movement which originated in America quickly spread. Athletes had never exercised collective power like this.
The power of players these days in this country, or in sport in general, I think has only been realised in the last 12 months since George Floyd's death. Players realise that if we want to do something, whether it be support the NHS and give a donation of our wages, whether it be wearing Black Lives Matter on our shirts, whether it be taking a knee, if all the players are kind of in unity, there's not really much that anybody can say.
In America, the Atlanta Dream basketball team protested their own owner, Kelly Loeffler, who was also the state senator. She had called the Black Lives Matter movement Marxist and divisive, and so the players campaigned for her political rival. Reverend Raphael Warnock went from being way down in the polling to being elected. These women had helped the Democrats win the Senate.
When you're in a minority group or in a group that's more marginalized, like, you're inherently political and you can't do anything about that. So I think there's a luxury in being able to say, like, oh, keep politics out of sports when this affects our reality and our humanity.
It's difficult to believe it's only 5 years since American football player Colin Kaepernick was cast aside by the NFL for refusing to sing the national anthem in a protest against racism and police brutality. Now brands are actively seeking out athletes who take a stand, as long as it's genuine.
If you have a natural, authentic voice, as Marcus Rashford did, then it can have a very positive impact. He grew up in a low-income family. His mother worked full-time but still wasn't able to always put food on the table for them. So he knew exactly what that experience was like, and he was therefore able to talk about it with a great level of insight.
Athlete activism isn't a new phenomenon, but the unrest following George Floyd's murder has turbocharged the power they wield in society. Their voice has never been louder. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Well, still to come on Sky News Breakfast, concerns over epilepsy drugs and the risk they may pose to unborn babies. Talk to a couple of experts in a moment.
So we created the book really to highlight the importance of good eyesight and to create something that would cause people to pause and take a moment to think about their own vision. The book is entirely blurred, so every page, front cover, every illustration of the classic is blurred, and we hope that the campaign will raise awareness. Because as you said, we commissioned some research last autumn which found that 23% of parents haven't taken their child for a sight test. We're committed to ensuring that people get their eyes checked regularly, and with children it's so important because it can have a long-lasting effect on their life, but also on their development and their ability to enjoy books and reading. We chose the classic from Lewis Carroll, particularly because it may reach out to parents, grandparents, because lots of people probably have very fond memories of reading the book, looking at the illustrations from their own childhood. There's three things we'd really like parents to look out for. As number one, if they notice their child eye is turning in or turning out, perhaps their child is more clumsy, has poor hand-eye coordination is a classic telltale sign. If they're sitting very close to a TV or screen or holding books really up close, or even concentration problems. Perhaps they were performing well in class and then that's dropped off. So now they're not concentrating for long periods of time, or actually their behaviour's changed. All telltale signs that actually a sight test could be really important. And not all children who go for a sight test end up with glasses. So a lot of children who have perfect sight leave the opticians not needing glasses. They're only prescribed if they're absolutely necessary.
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Sunny spells will develop this afternoon, but there will be showers again, mainly across northern and eastern areas of the UK where they will be heavy and thundery with hail at times. There will also be spells of heavy rain across southwest Ireland and the southwest of England. Elsewhere will be mostly fine and dry, but it'll be a cool and breezy day everywhere. With the generally cool and unsettled conditions, pollen levels will remain low everywhere again. Currently, small amounts of grass pollen are now airborne, and oak tree pollen poses a risk during spells of sunny, dry weather. Spores will also increase temporarily after any rain.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.